Have you guys even put it out yet?
We opened registration, but we didn't even have a registration form, so there was a little bit of a miscommunication. So that's what I have to work on today, because Kim's not here and Emily is still not here, so I'm just running the office here. Apparently they almost died last week when I wasn't here, so that's interesting.
Did you just get back?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yesterday.
Oh, so you had an extra week. Good for you.
Yeah. No, I planned that well in advance, luckily, because before this all hit, my things were already like sorted. So, so at least I got my holiday, and otherwise I would have been here last week already, working away. But I won't be able to take a break anytime soon, at least until we figure everyone's, where is everyone going to go? We get new people, like what's going to happen. So, so yeah, it's been a little bit of a struggle the last 5 months, but it's good. I'm learning a lot that I wouldn't have learned if they were away.
There she is. Did she see us?
Hello.
No. So that's not that easy. It's that easy. I gotta get my phone going. Where is it?
Morning.
Morning. Can you hear me?
You don't need to hear me.
Hi, Liz.
Hey there.
Morning. Good morning.
Morning, Peter.
How are you? Here we go.
Can you hear me, or am I on mute?
No, I can hear you, Sabra. How are you?
Oh,
Happy
well,
New Year.
you my voice. I'm actually home from Japan
I have it somewhere.
and picked up a beautiful plain cold. So I'm sounding pretty croaky this morning.
Yeah, picked up one of those when I came home too. It's just terrible how those planes will do it to you.
And it comes out of absolutely nowhere. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Anyway, here's my ready for my parent boast. We were over watching our daughter playing hockey. They won the gold.
Congratulations. That's fantastic.
So it was a very exciting story.
Do I have to log in?
That's great. Did you have a good holiday?
Yeah, you should, because we're going to put you in your group with
Yeah.
you.
How are
Good.
you feeling, Liz? You
I also need to get right now.
Sorry?
You're looking better. Are you feeling well?
I'm feeling better. I'm trying to come back, like a real part-time right now. There's lots of recovery after every time I go, but I'm desperate to get back. I'm just dying being away. So it's starting. It's amazing how long these concussion things last.
No kidding.
Yeah, it's just awful. But yeah, starting to feel like I'll get there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, here comes everybody.
Good morning, Liz.
Good morning, Jessica. Do we have Dan on so we can do a check with him, Pete?
Good morning, everyone.
Ooh, feedback from Peter. Kill somebody's computer there.
Am I on mute?
Okay, I just unmuted myself.
Okay. Amory, I sent you a chat. Do you see it on your screen?
I sent one to Peter.
Unmute. Oh.
Have you got two computers running in that room? Because that's sometimes when you get feedback.
I know.
I can't hear you, Pete. You're muted. No.
Yeah, I don't hear them in the office.
No, I see. Peter, you're still muted by the looks of the way you're set up.
But,
Can you hear us now?
Yes.
Yes, there. Now we can hear you.
can you hear me?
Yes, now I can, and I don't hear any feedback.
Wonderful.
So when you break out with your groups, you might have to just leave this room because otherwise we'll have that interaction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's fine. Yeah.
So Amory, I just sent you a note.
Yeah, I'm busy responding.
You can just tell me, is there anything I need to know before we start?
No, I don't think so, because the only other thing would have been that we just had to make you presenter, but now you're just going to speak normally, and I'll just make sure everyone else is muted when you speak, so that way we're not getting that feedback.
Yeah, I was going to have a few slides and then decided last night on the plane that I just have some notes that'll help.
Okay, awesome.
Have we got Dan on board yet so we can test drive his? Because he will have slides, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't have him yet.
Okay, and Pete, you're putting everybody in groups as they come. We are a little bit early, so.
Well, I can't find our option.
Yeah, Anne-Marie was going to do that, but.
Oh, okay.
But for some reason it's not showing up. I don't know.
What's not showing up? The groups?
Yeah.
Are you you're the originator, right?
Yeah, I am. Like yours, the.
You're the only one who can see groups.
You should be the only one, yeah.
What is it? Morning. Good morning.
I can't find it at all.
Morning, Margaret.
Morning.
This is a little bit of a problem because if I
Why don't you re-enter?
Will that
because
take
if
everybody out?
I take out, it's gonna throw everyone off.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay. Invite, share. If you go to share,
No, that's just you sharing your screen on mine.
oh, okay.
Yeah.
I'll
We want
just
that.
stop that. You should see it though. That's yours.
Oh.
Share.
I notice you're recording. I wonder if it makes a difference if you're recording.
It shouldn't.
Okay.
I can stop recording and see if that's gonna help, but
Might as well. We don't need this little piece recorded.
yeah, it's just easier to press recording when it starts than to rather remember it throughout the whole session to
Fair
start.
enough.
We're pleased to be gathering to reconnect and refocus, reframe, and potentially reinvigorate the inquiries. We will start this morning with a share out by one of our group members, Dan Watt, a principal at in Prince George at Ron Brent Elementary. He's going to share with us this morning his inquiry and focus on the questions that we had asked all of you to be thinking around. We wanted to give an opportunity to activate your reflecting through listening to Dan share some of his own learning. And then we'll give opportunity again for the reflection groups and give you some time to share out with each other. So without further ado, let's go to Dan Watt and his fantastic new toque and hear about his inquiry on examining literacy rates and how he's provided some structures for teachers to facilitate facilitating their own.
Hello.
It looks like everybody's been muted, so that's convenient on my end. As advertised, my name's Dan, and I'm the principal at Ron Brent Elementary in Prince George. I've been here, this is my 4th year at Ron Brent, and just a little bit about our school that's relevant. We currently have 224 students. That's today. It changes from week to week as we do have a relatively transient population. We are categorized as a tier 1 inner city school, and in this district that comes with some a little bit of extra dollars to help with increased staffing and decreased ratios in our primary classes. As well, we have 2 AB workers, an AB social worker, a community schools coordinator who has a social work background, and a meals coordinator as well. And then many of the other things that you're all familiar with in terms of EA support and counselors and that sort of thing. We also have a 60% Aboriginal population. And as I mentioned, we are an inner city school, so we deal with issues surrounding poverty and trauma. My short course statement of intent, the thing that I wanted to focus on was restructuring supports to improve literacy outcomes at our school. We have used a variety of measures in the past to assess our literacy outcomes, including things I'm sure you're all familiar with, the DRA, the DART, EPRA, EIEIO. And what we found was the results, what we focused on were with our primary grades. They ranged from 34 to 63% not meeting expectations. So pretty drastic and definitely a concern. So we started using a resource called the Fountas and Pinnell resource, and it's leveled literacy intervention, the LLI kit. So what we wanted to do last year was to in-service our staff and use that throughout our primary grades. So my plan that I brought to short course 2 was to look at the 2018-2019 school year with the structures and schedules that we'd already developed and create an environment that would allow teachers to facilitate their own LLI groups and push it out across the school. So conditions that I set for myself were that we had this lagging set of reading scores and that I wanted to grow the year 2 intervention school-wide. So where I began with that was looking at conditions that I would set for the staff. And first of all, I had to ask the staff, are you willing to participate in this? We had a district-led initiative to support it in our primary end, and that was wonderful. However, pushing it out school-wide was something of a different magnitude for sure. So it required some supplemental pay and some in-service. We brought folks in to train them in August, so folks that had teaching experience and wanted to learn about it, but also new teachers, because as I'm sure you're all dealing with, we had many first-year teachers coming into our school, and so they were learning to teach reading for the first time and learning to use these resources for the first time as well. So we simply asked, and then we provided supports to help them learn. We also asked them to collaborate on this in particular with their colleagues. So we have PLC time built into our week. We have an early dismissal model, but we were also asking if they would use some of that time to collaborate around the LLI reading intervention. Our primaries, as I mentioned, were previously part of a district supported model, and so we were asking them to continue with that model. We call it the Comprehensive Academic Intervention Strategy, or CASE is the acronym, and so we were asking for them to continue with that, and in the hopes that that would trickle up to our intermediate colleagues. We also asked that everybody do a primary and intermediate leveling of their reading groups. And I'll get a little bit more into the scheduling and the rotation, but the teachers led that leveling of groups. I also asked for uninterrupted literacy time across the school. So that's a scheduling piece that we worked on from the start. And that would allow time for the whole group, as I mentioned, to have uninterrupted literacy time that was dedicated every single day. We used a schedule that's specific to the Fountains and Pinell resource, but not unique, that has a 2-day sequence in terms of the teaching model. And so we followed that. I asked teachers to participate in that. We also talked about values and beliefs again, and it's something that we do every couple of years, but I mentioned having new teachers and also implementing this new plan. I wanted to talk about values and beliefs at the start because one of the things that we ended up coming together on was students need time to think and talk about their reading. They need time to engage in authentic reading and to act as literate people, and what would that look like? As well, I wanted to challenge the belief, I believe there was this belief amongst our staff, I wanted to bring to the table that I believe all students can learn to read. So those were some of the core beliefs and values that we came up with as a staff. We also talked about a common language, and that's something that the staff is familiar with from spending a great deal of time on our behavior matrix, but having a common language in terms of instruction. There's some jargon and edu-speak, I think, that goes along with any teaching program, but with the LLI, there was some specific common language that we wanted to talk about. As well, common procedures, as we have classes that are leveled. So in our morning block, the 4 intermediate classes are leveled, and then students go to a different classroom perhaps. We wanted them to be familiar with the procedure so that when they rotate to a new teacher within 6 to 8 weeks, or if they migrate groups because their reading levels improve, we want them to understand the procedure when they go to the new teacher or the new classroom. And that goes for from year to year as well. They will understand as they move from primary to intermediate, they'll be familiar with this program. Forming and reforming groups was an important piece as well. We do monitor progress on a daily basis, and we do see students improving their reading levels, which is delightful. That's the idea. And we're trying to allow for fluidity within the groups, between the groups, so that as students improve, they're able to change groups and level up, as it were. Differentiation is a much bigger topic, but we do have groups that are a range. The way that our structures are set up, everybody has a dedicated block, like I mentioned, so all the intermediates are in the first block of the day, and all the primaries are in a different block of the day. And that allows us to put all the EAs to work in the intermediate rooms only during that first block of the day, to have as many hands on deck as possible for those reading groups. And in addition to the EAs, we've also got all our non-enrolling teachers taking part. So intermediate teachers, and myself included, we all take a group, a large group that is, and our non-enrolling teachers, our specialists, are taking small groups of around 3 students, as many as 5, but ideally around 3. And they are doing the literacy interventions with the students that we've chosen to target. Along those lines, differentiation in a large group size is an issue, and it's an issue in all the subject areas at our school. For instance, in the grade 6-7 class that I work in on a daily basis, we have pre-K to grade 8 range in different subject areas. So differentiation is quite a challenge. I did mention as well our RTI model and our behavior matrix. This ties in and is particularly important because, of course, as students participate in the large group activity, if I'm running a small group intervention, I need for the other 26 students to be doing something productive. And so our school behavior matrix comes into play, our special needs support comes into play, and we do use models like Daily 5, for instance. All our teachers are familiar with Daily 5. Another condition I would say that we continue to work on is around attendance. We absolutely have attendance issues, and that's something that we continue to struggle with. And I think we're proactive about it, but it is a factor in implementing a program like this. So for instance, the primaries chose to move their block to first thing in the afternoon because we have much better attendance in the afternoon. And so the intermediates, we are where we are right now, but we're also stuck with needing to use EAs when they're at work, and there's only so many blocks in the day. But with those primaries, we are seeing that make a difference. As more children are in attendance, they're able to participate in the intervention. So almost done, and then can have some questions perhaps. I wanted to talk a little bit about resources. I think probably a couple of the biggest challenges that we dealt with initially were space and storage. Having a space that's dedicated in the school for literacy, aside from the library, which is booked full all the time. We dedicated a room to this that we call the Literacy Lounge, and it's running 2 groups at all times during the day. It used to be a counselor's office, so it's a nice cozy space with enough room for a couple of round tables and a teacher's desk and a couch in the corner, sort of a thing. But that was a big mental shift for people. And also I still had to find room for the counselor. Storage of materials was also a challenge. These Fountas and Pinnell leveled kits, we bought, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4 kits right off the hop. And they come on 2 or 3 big pallets. So we had to unpack those and figure out where we were going to warehouse this stuff. And some of it can go in classrooms, but of course we want it available to everybody all the time. So we had to build cabinetry and have that installed and figure out where it was going to go. Staffing I mentioned as well. It was the high school folks will probably be all over this, but I found that whole scheduling matrix to be quite challenging. And that was something that took a few drafts to figure out, but it did kind of remind me of my high school days, making a timetable. And just acquiring the resource in the first place, they're quite pricey. It was about $8,000 per level. And like I mentioned, we bought 4 initially, so orange, green, blue, and red. And we've since supplemented with 2 additional ones. They're well worth the money, for sure, but it was a bit of a layout of cash initially. There's an additional piece of training that folks need to become familiar with to use the Fountas and Pinnell system. It's called the Benchmark Assessment System, or the BAS. It's wonderful, but it does take a little bit of time to implement, about 45 minutes per student. And once folks got their heads wrapped around it, they're quite comfortable with it. And it can be used at the start of the year, mid-year again, and at the end of the year. I haven't talked about district supports much, but we do utilize district supports to help with this. We have a literacy support teacher and a numeracy support teacher, and they're available on call, so we book them constantly. They're in here all the time, as well as our ABED department. And the ABED department is also very involved in another aspect of this initiative, which is our after-school academic program. Now that's a district-wide district-led initiative, but we have an ASAP, we call it, ASAP program in 8 of our schools, and it specifically uses the Fountas and Pinnell LLI intervention kits. So we have reading interventions going on in this school. We've targeted grade 2s, and we have 18 kids that come to the after-school program, and they're getting a health and nutrition focus, a cultural focus led by our ABED worker, and then some literacy and numeracy after school. And it's been very productive and very successful. Those are kids that we are seeing improve the most drastic changes. So I could share a few anecdotal remarks from some of my teachers, or I could shift gears and take questions. Okay, seeing no hands, I'll share a couple remarks. I had the pleasure of having a young lady in grade 1 in my office day before yesterday. She started in a B group in September, and she was mistakenly thought to be in grade 2 at the beginning of the year by the teacher who was doing an intervention. So she was with some grade 3 students who were struggling with letter sound recognition. This is a grade 1, keep in mind. She needed a little boost with her letters and needed to learn some basics with putting sounds together and noticing language tricks like a silent E. But then she got it, and she's flying past her grade 3 peers, now reading at level 8. And that's in a matter of weeks. So just a lovely little story about this grade 1 girl. I have another student. This little girl, she is in grade 4, reading steadily at a level M, and has been making dramatic improvements in talking about text and writing about reading. So this morning, and this was written yesterday, they were wrapping up a biography about an English swimmer from the 1920s, and she says, "I love this book." So she's extended her knowledge of what they've read, and she's doing her own research online, asking about sharks and what else lives in the English Channel. So just a fascinating little anecdote about this student who's taken things to a different level. Just turning my phone off.
Fantastic.
Yeah, one of the teachers that I asked for some feedback, he is a grade 1 teacher, and he's working with, his intervention group has 3 pre-A students. So they are only a few lessons in, and they are doing fairly well with a month of practice. But the strategies and habits are the piece that they are teaching. It's much like learning a daily 5 rotation. The kids kind of have to get down the structure and the routine. And once they get into the swing of it, it's like learning how to use a swing, right? There's a mechanical piece almost involved. This particular teacher mentioned that he finds the students who struggle the most have significant ACEs at home, adverse childhood experiences, and that those interfere with their emotional stability is how he termed it at school. And that would not be uncommon at our school. We find that in general. We need to do a little check-in and find out, have you had breakfast? How was your sleep last night? Do you need a little nap on a yoga mat? And then they're sometimes ready to go again. So.
Great. Thanks, Dan. I didn't realize that I could unmute myself.
There you go.
I wanted to just pop in again. Thank you for the presentation. So what we wanted to offer this morning was an example of an inquiry that was moving along, and to give you opportunities to hear from Dan, what were some of the conditions that he recognized that he needed to set based on his own culture in his school? What are the ways that he set conditions for teachers to be able to connect with each other and do the learning? What were some of the challenges that they've been finding? And then what are the resources that they've been drawing into their inquiry to be able to continue to nudge along? And so sharing about some of the scheduling issues, the space, some of those resources. As we get ready to move into breakout rooms, I don't know if we have the chat rooms ready to roll, but we wanted to give this webinar, we wanted to give the opportunity for this to be a bit of a working webinar for you all to connect with your facilitators, to be able to talk through where are you at, what have you done, what have you noticed, where are you going, and how, as we move sort of across into the next phase, how are you starting to document some of what you're looking at? And so Dan has started to share some of his findings, giving us those anecdotes of students. So those are beautiful findings that you'll want to start to think about. How do you capture those? Mm-hmm. So, Amarie, do we have chat rooms ready to roll?
Hey, Saber, no, we don't. Unfortunately, I would have to log off and in to get that option again. But we're thinking we're only 10 participants, so maybe we could just go around those 10. It's up to you.
Sure. I don't have the list of participants in front of me. I don't see them all.
If you, Saber, you can actually see them if you go down to the bottom of your screen and hit participants, you can see them there. But yeah, we were thinking that since we are a smaller group of participants, that might be a way to do it. And if we give everybody just a few minutes to think about those questions you just raised that Dan has raised about what conditions he set for himself, what conditions he set for staff, and what challenges and resources are there. Give everybody just a couple minutes to think of that. And then we can whip down that list and we can talk with Anna, we can talk with Derek and Dylan and Jim Kim and Nancy's on there, and just a couple of things of the kind of conditions that they're finding they are setting, or the challenges they are running into in setting those conditions. Does that sound okay to you?
Oh, that sounds great. And I see the participant list now. So we'll give everyone just a couple of minutes to make a few notes on their own, and then we can go around and do a share out. That sounds great.
I'm just wondering if I would be able to jump in here because I have a meeting to go to.
Thanks, Anna.
Yeah, no problem. So I had a little bit of upheaval happen in my life. I found out just before Christmas that I was going to be transferred to a different school. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about what I did in my smaller school, where I was teaching 0.5 and doing admin 0.5, my two smaller schools. And I'm now full-time administrator at a much bigger school. But the one condition that I really focused on was to give time and space to teachers to allow them to collaborate. So I got into the classroom. We called it the inquiry hour. I would take over a classroom when another teacher had prep, so that the two teachers would be able to get together and talk. And I do have to leave quite quickly here. So I'm just going to give one example of when that time and space worked really well in a way I didn't expect it to. My grade 4-5 teacher worked with my K1 teacher to build provocation tables to improve writing, to try to get kids playing with the provocation tables, so they would have details to bring back to their writing. And that was really cool because that's not an example of teachers that would work together normally. So that was fantastic, and it worked really, really well. I actually was able to have, because I was also co-principal of 4 schools, and we were able to navigate having a teacher in Midway work with a teacher in Rock Creek as well. And they were working on, one was a new teacher, so she was invited into the older teacher's classroom, and then they had time to go and talk about building really good routines into a grade 2-3 class that would allow learning to occur. So those were 2 things that occurred that it was really good. Now my goal is, how do I have that time and space and integrate it into my new school? But it's only day 2, and I'm going to a school-based team meeting right now, and but it is exciting, and it's been a lot of fun. So thank you.
Well, and thanks for jumping in, Anna. I did see your note and see that you have to rush off. Wishing you all the best as you start this transition.
Bye, guys.
Look forward to
Bye, Anna. Thanks very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
So as we look at our list, Derek, are you able to hear us?
Yes, I am. I think
Oh, there
so.
he is.
Can you hear me?
Yes. So did you want to just share a few of your reflections on your inquiry, where you've been setting some conditions for yourself, for teachers, resources you've been bringing in to help nudge you along?
Actually, my thinking was following on Dan's example, so it's not specific to my inquiry per se, but I had some really neat thoughts. I love what Dan's doing there. And just to follow up a little bit on sort of that literacy intervention piece and some of the conditions that we've been working on at our school around that. You know, one of the things for us was starting with a really clear expectation that our interventions and our focused support for kids was going to be data-based. We used the BASC, we used the PM benchmarking, and we had to sort of shift a culture away from some of our behavior-based academic intervention, you know, where teachers are sending kids for support simply because of their behaviors and not necessarily because of their academic needs.
Oh,
And
that's
so,
great.
yeah, so we really made that clear that was how we were going to determine support. And, you know, in order to do that, we also had to, well, we started in a place where a lot of our assessment data, you know, teachers were saying, well, if you want us to do this data, we need the time to do it. And so we started by giving a lot of time, but have over the last sort of year and a half really shifted the culture away from, if you want me to do testing, then you've got to give me time for it, to an understanding that this is embedded in my practice. And that it's not a snapshot. It's not, okay, in this week I'm testing all my kids. It's, oh, look, this student has made progress. I'm going to reassess them so I know where they are all the time. And we don't give release for assessments anymore. We don't need to, because it's happening in the classroom. The other piece that we found, we had to get creative, and we did some similar things to what Dan was saying in terms of combining some of our classrooms for support and things, but trying to get creative around bringing in enough people, right, to really give targeted intervention for students that really need it. And one of the creative programs that we were actually approached by Central Schools, which is our main sort of alternate program in Kelowna. And we were approached by a program they have there called Gateway. And Gateway is a program that's getting kids that may or may not graduate ready for transitioning after high school. And so we were approached by them saying, is there a way to partner with us to get the kids in, working with kids for social skills, for job sort of skills. And so we paired them up with our Daily 5 and our reading interventions with some of our classrooms. And the data that we saw, the increase that we saw after like sort of a 4 or 5 week intense, these bigger kids are coming in, they're sitting one-on-one, they're reading with kids, and we saw jumps in their benchmarks as they increased their reading, partly because of the focus, but I think a lot of it had to do with this incredible motivation to impress and to work alongside these cool older kids. Of course, the Gateway program will tell you that it was a remarkable scenario for them as well, because these older kids that were in some cases lacking confidence, often struggling with attendance, were all of a sudden, you know, coming to school every day because they didn't want to let their little buddies down. So it was just a creative way of getting more bodies in with our primary students to do some intensive intervention early in the year to get them moving on their reading path, so that we would see those gains. And then, you know, and we actually benchmarked the entire class before and after our first cohort, and saw a remarkable increase in the number of students that went from not yet meeting expectations in their reading to meeting grade level expectations. So just a thought and a kind of a way we got around the barrier of having enough bodies.
Well, that's great. Thanks, Derek. And part of what we want to give, as I had said before, this opportunity for you to share with each other either the inquiry pieces that you're looking at, some of the challenges that you're experiencing. And I mean, it is a small group, and so being able to connect with each other and share some of the ways that what you're noticing in your work can help move others along in their inquiry is great. And these are the opportunities that we don't give enough time to for principals. And so to have this this morning is great. So as I look down the list here, is Dylan
Yep, I'm here.
With us? Oh, there's Dylan. Hi, did
There
you
you
want
go.
to share some reflections, some thoughts, either continuing with the conversation that Derek and Dan are moving along, or your own inquiry into where you're at?
I'm still working along. Probably my biggest condition would be getting teacher buy-in. I'm working with targeted teachers to get that going, but that's where I am right now. I've got a fairly significant buy-in from my primary teachers here at the one school, at the K-7 school that I'm in, and I'm still working with my K-12 school staff. So just getting them on board with, like I said, there's a culture here where I will assess only once in the year. Anything more, you're going to need to give me extra. So I'm still working on that kind of culture. That's really where I'm at right now.
Well, and that's interesting because it picks up on what Dan and Derek have been talking about in terms of how do we create opportunities for teachers to learn to want to embed in their practices.
Yeah.
This assessment piece. So, this might be something to connect with, Derek and Dan at some point, to see what are the ways that they have found that have created opportunities for that in their work. So that's great. Right. Is there anything in terms of resources that you've been reading or thinking about or looking at that's been helping you, or that you'd like to share out with the group? Or
most of my reading and most of my research at this point has been learning, understanding PM benchmarks, et cetera, et cetera. I'm secondary, only recently moved to elementary. So all of these lovely acronyms are a bit challenging at times. So that's basically my need right now.
And where you're at, great. Thank you, Dylan.
Thanks.
I see Joanne has joined us. Joanne, did you want to chime in with any of your thoughts around where you're at with your inquiry, what you've been noticing, where you're headed, other pieces you're connecting to in the conversation? We may not have.
Yeah, no, I just unmuted, sorry.
She is. Hello.
I've had a very rushed start to my morning, so my brain's not quite there. I just got on here like 5 minutes ago, so it's going. So I can say that much. I do need to sit down though and be more thoughtful about a reflection. So.
And you just did pop on, so we can come back to you as well. And so part of we had Dan start us off thinking about what are some of the conditions that were set for his own learning in his inquiry with his reading interventions up in Prince George with some of his teachers, and what are the resources that they've been looking at, and thinking about ways that he can start to document some of those findings. So we'll give you a few more minutes to settle in with us, Joanne, and put you off the hot seat. Is Kim in the house? And I know I'm jumping over our facilitators at the moment to get to participants. We can come back to our facilitators as well if you want to share some of your, I know that some of you have got your own inquiries on the go.
Hi there, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Hi, everyone. I first want to say, Dan, thank you so much for sharing all of your work that you're doing with your staff and your students. Certainly motivating to see. So just a little bit about me. I moved to new school in September, and so these past few months have been a lot about relationship building and getting to know staff. It's a school of 740 students with a staff of nearly 90 a staff of 90 adults in the building. So it's learning a lot of different names, getting to know everyone, different personalities. But, and then just this past week, a new principal started at our school. Lovely, lovely, lovely lady. So there's just been a lot of shifts happening. A lot of staff members, movement of staff members in and out. So that's problematic in navigating as well. But a lot of really amazing things that are going on in the school as well. So a lot of great group interaction, planning, collaboration, and we've had 2 focuses going on at our school this year, and one's on SEL. Last year, they said they wanted to focus and use, or they wanted to bring in a new resource so that there was consistency within every classroom. And that was the second step program. And so this year it's a check-in to see how everything is moving along, how the resources is maybe affecting or changing teaching practice, as well as understanding how the students are learning with the resource. And the second piece is on literacy, and it's just we have a home reading program that we send home with kids, and we acknowledge the students every month, and the focus has been on the intermediate level and how we can improve their motivation in reading at home.
Great, thank you, Kim. And it sounds like many of you are sharing the same transitions challenge this year of starting new and trying to figure out how to move within the conditions for learning in systems that are shifting. So as we think about this notion of inquiry and conditions and cultures and climates, that constant piece of moving is always something that we need to be thinking about as well, in terms of how to shift and develop resiliency ourselves as we're thinking about how to continue to grow and learn in new places. So we've got a few more names that we've on the screen here. Nancy, Rod, Scott, Trent.
I can share if that's okay.
Nancy.
So yeah, I think everybody's done that. Everything's changing. I'm back in Telegraph Creek after the wildfires. I was in Atlan for 3.5 months. So my inquiry now is me. I'm the only staff member at the school. So we're just implementing Daily 5 with a K-9 class of 16 kids. So that's new. So anyways, and then hopefully we have a new teacher coming at the end of January. So new teacher in that he'll be back. He was here in the last year. But so yeah, it's just work in progress is basically where I'm at.
Well, it's interesting that the folks that have joined it, that you always have in the room who you need to have in the room. And it's interesting that there's sort of this literacy inquiry string going along, so that as you're hearing about, what others are doing, it's giving you an opportunity to think on your own inquiry as well. So good luck with that, Nancy. I'm not sure too many others in the room can share similarly in terms of being the only educator in the school at the moment. So we'll look forward to hearing more from you when you get that colleague back in.
Right on, thanks.
Scott, or I jumped over Rod. Rod, are you with us here still?
I think Rod just had to step out. He's in another building, but he texted me. He's down at VP and they're trying to figure out some coverage for the classes today. So do you mind if I jump in?
Yes, please.
Okay, so I appreciate what everybody shared so far. There's some people that are in transitions. Dan and Derek had some nice stories from the projects they're doing. And I guess what a few things have sparked in me. One, when I listen to other people talk about the projects in their school, it reminds me how unique we all are in our own situations. And Saber, you just said something about setting inquiry conditions and cultures and climates and how to build resiliency and all that thing, that knowing your situation. That's sort of my context right here is I'm staying at my school, but we're changing for the second year in a row. So this year we added grade 6s to our 6 and 9 school. We had a limited timeline to do that. And it was really interesting because there aren't a lot of grade 6 to 9 middle schools out there. And by keeping our grade 9s, we also had to create a model that supported made them feel like they weren't getting ripped off not going to the high school because some of the other grade 9s in our zone were going to the high school. So we had to build something from scratch with little time. And I think when I go back to some of those conditions and things, my work in the last 4 years previous, the principal before me really built a culture of growth mindset on this staff, which is really special because we're a bit of a hinterland school in our district, and we have at least a third turnover every year. So when you can get some of those neat culture pieces that are just there and the new people come in and embrace them, it allowed us to move forward pretty quickly with some really drastic changes in terms of what people had experienced for a long time here and how the situation looked this year. Now we're adding French immersion next year, so we're kind of doing the same thing again. But, you know, I guess in all of these ramblings, when I think about, you know, creating opportunities to embed things in practice, the thing that we've embedded is that we can grow and we can improve and we can work together when we do it in a collaborative way. And, you know, at the last staff meeting, we were asking for some pretty, you know, some feedback. So, you know, the way we framed it is we're about, you know, a third of the way through our year, what's working, what's not working. As the groups were doing their work, one of the senior teachers noticed a brand new teacher writing down some feedback and then kind of crossing it out because they were worried we were going to be upset. And the teacher reached over and said, no, don't do that, rewrite that, because Scott and Robbie really want to know what's going on. They really want to know what you're thinking. They really want your true and honest feedback. And to me, that was such a validation of all of the work that we've done to build team and culture here, because somebody was nervous about what they wanted to share, and a senior staff member said, no, give it to them. And I really value that, and I thank that member, because whether that person stays here or not in their career, I think they're going to move forward with feedback is okay if we give it the right way. That was a kind of an awesome moment for us. And I guess listening to people too, I'm thinking about, you know, resources always. I was listening to Dan's story there and all the resources he needed. And I think what that reminded me of is we always have to be assessing the resources that we already have. You know, for me, it's really easy when change is happening to think about, well, if I only had this, it would work, or I can't do that because I don't have this. It's super easy to go down that road. And what we try hard to do here is look at the things that we do have, and sometimes we don't see it right away. So all I can say is trust your people. I've had some leaders this year step up in phenomenal and unexpected ways. And to be honest, maybe people that we didn't see as leaders enough. And we just to see their talents, it's been great. So I don't know if that's a bit too rambly for everybody, but those are my thoughts, and yeah, happy to hear any feedback.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. Well, and it always reminds us, and this the process that we had today around sort of sharing our rambling thinking is an important piece of the learning process, and finding opportunities to make your way through the rambles is really important, and we don't often give ourselves enough time to do that. And so I think you've actually wrapped it up quite nicely for us in terms of this was an opportunity this morning to hear from Dan as a model of this is where we're at, this is where we're going, this is what we need, and this is where we're still having to go. And I think, you know, as we look at the time, and I know we're starting to move towards wrapping it up, I just wondered if any of the facilitators, Margaret, Peter, Jeff, Heidi, Darren, if anything that you wanted to add in very quickly. We're moving to the end of our time here. We do have this, the room is open until 8:45, I believe. So if anyone does want to stay and continue to share the feedback and the thinking, but anything that you wanted to add in very briefly?
I just wanted to add something, if that's okay. This is Jeff.
Yeah.
Hi, good to see you all. The school culture thing and getting teachers on board. The school is about 1,300. I got about 8 teachers. And in secondary, we have some people who don't really want to change. I have found that sometimes if they see I'm a little resistant to something, they get interested. So I'm sort of relying on some of the teachers who are already doing work. There's a lot of things already going on, and I nurture them, but I also show a little resistance to some things. It seems to invite some of those stuck in the mud people who want to be oppositional to initiate things on their own. And it's worked out quite well. There are some people who have been naysayers, and I'm just, I don't know what you would call it, but it's sort of like catch and release or push-pull. And so I let them feel like they're driving forward something, and I'm keeping that a secret. And they were originally oppositional, so they're actually going off in the direction I want them to go with cross-curricular intervention. And I look a little bit like I'm stuck sometimes, and I throw things away sometimes, and then I nurture them. And it's worked amazingly well. It was almost accidental. But because I have an admin team, we get to find out sometimes about the people who are talking behind our back. We can hear, and then someone will say, this person doesn't think that. We can strategize around how to get them to do things that are good for them without them knowing that.
Thanks, Jeff. And as I look, Liz, I just wanted to check in. I'm thinking I will wrap it up and close out for anyone who needs to go, and then we can keep the room open for others who want to stay and have a bit of an open conversation. Does that work?
Absolutely. I think that's great. We do want to recognize that school is about to begin, but also that this conversation that is a bit of a ramble, but at the same time is such an important part of our conditions that we set. If you are willing to stay put, please do. And for those of you who do need to go, we say thank you very, very much. We will get all the information back to you in terms of our next gathering in, I believe it's in April, but don't quote me, my brain is a mess. So we'll get all of that to you. Again, thank you to our facilitators. I know you're staying in touch with your folks as you go through. And we'll just continue on this marvelous journey together. Sabre, thank you very much for hosting for us today. And we're, again, not going away. So if you need to, thank you. Have a great new year. We'll be in touch. And for those of you who'd like to stay put, and facilitators, perhaps you could for a moment. That would be great. Thank you very much, everyone.
That's great.
Morning, team. It's Trent here. I just want to let you know I have been listening, appreciating all the stories that everybody's shared this morning. You have to run shortly as well, but happy to share it our next time for the other priorities of starting up the day.
Thank you, Trent. Trent, I saw you on the list and then I didn't see you there. So I'm sorry that I didn't give a chance for you to share out what you were busy up to in your school.
Yeah, no worries, Sabre. I can now if you'd like me to.
Yeah, if you've got some time, I'm really curious to know, and I know there are a few others who have stayed who would love to hear from you. I apologize for not for having jumped over you.
Yeah, no problem. So at Dr. Knox in Kelowna, middle school, grades 7 to 9, we have our school goal is belonging. We've been working on that for about 3.5 years now, and the goal that was created with our student, staff, families, and for about the last 2 years, we've, as part of that goal, shifted our attention a little bit more to our goal, which is actively engaged learners, and that has resulted in us doing well. And that's, I guess, been the reason that's happened is because we've been doing a lot of scanning of our student, staff, and families. That's kind of where our scans have led us. A couple years ago, we created a long inquiry question with many of our staff, and the question was, if we focus more on inquiry, innovation, cross-curricular projects, project-based learning, differentiation, competencies, and co-teaching, what changes would we see in student engagement, curricular learning, and understanding of the learning process and curricular outcomes? So very long, but it has allowed us to do a lot of learning for ourselves, staff learning. And then from that staff learning that we've been doing has resulted in a lot of changes in the classroom and students found. It's required a lot of communication with parents because, of course, with the implementation of the redesigned curriculum and some of the shifts, our attention on innovative learning environments, cross-curricular kinds of projects, communicating student learning in a different way and changing kind of shifting assessment to more strengths-based assessment versus letter grades, like that, it has led to a lot of questions for families. It's not necessarily what we're doing is not necessarily what they experience themselves. But when you talk about the conditions, what I was thinking of is what's allowed us to make some of those shifts and make progress. And really, I think what it has been for us is really trying to work on what we feel is most important. So having some focus or alignment and coherence, so it's not like we're doing too many things all at the same time. And then also just having the opportunity to build capacity for all of our staff, and giving staff the opportunity to take leadership in our school. We have about 50 teachers, so having many different teacher leaders in our building leading the work that we're doing has been a real asset to our school. And in order to be able to get there, our learning opportunities, whether it's instructional based staffing, trying to create that common language that others spoke about. I know Dan was talking about that. Our learning focused around those priorities that we have. And then also collaboration time has been pretty essential to the work that we're doing. So we have common preps for teacher teams, things like that, so we can together. Have 4 half days of internal release time for collaboration that is structured in our school. And generally speaking, when you talk about resources, I agree with what Scott was saying around the use of the resources that you have. And I think it's just about leveraging sort of the strengths of your team. So a lot of different people having strengths areas, using resources. We don't have the resources available in our school. We've really been working hard to collaborate with our district level support teams. So our instructional leadership team, technology department, our agriculture experts, all of these areas. We have.
Well, you're starting to fade out there, and with your audio, I'm not sure I caught the last little bit there, but certainly hearing that you've got many different points of inquiry that you're trying to coalesce together to ensure that you stay focused on those things that really matter to you and your teachers. So I'm glad that you jumped in, Trent, to share with us. And I do see that Rod Baruda is with us still. Did I jump over you as well? No, he may have left. So Trent, thank you for sharing the work that you've been doing in your schools. Are there others who want to connect back in again, Joanne or Scott, who are here? We've got Terry with us still. The facilitators are here. If there are other comments or questions or thinking about the inquiries.
Abra, I would just mention that, there seems to be a theme around carving out space and time and making those connections in a deep way with staff, and how we embed collaborative time and the innovative ways that our principals are trying to establish that, I think has helped to really set the significant conditions of moving student achievement forward, as well as building culture and ethos within the school, and so I'm curious to know more. Scott has spoke about it. It has been part of the culture of Glen Rosa Middle School for a number of years, and I think that has contributed to the work and the progress. And Dan spoke of embedded collaborative time as well. So I think that would be an interesting theme to pick up, is ways in which collaborative time, the conditions of collaborative time are set. That's not me.
We're losing some audio here.
Hey, it's Rod here. Can you hear me?
Yes. Hi, Rod.
Hello. Oh, good. I've been following along, and I've been trying to jump in, but I couldn't figure out the mute thing. It wasn't working there for me, so I finally figured it out by going through the phone line. So I'd be happy to jump in. Sorry, Terry, to interrupt there. I'd be happy to jump in and talk a little bit and piggyback off the collaboration that you're talking about. Okay, so I'll speak a little bit on behalf of Jim Laird as well. He had to leave a little bit earlier. We are quite fortunate this year that the high school that myself and Jim feed into, our two middle schools, the three of our schools, our entire admin team, has really made an explicit effort to build in learning time as a group. So we get together every 3 weeks, and we're working on as a focus the instructional core as a means to engagement for students and furthering their passion for their learning. So when I'm looking at the 3 questions, the conditions that we set for ourselves is we've dedicated that time, and it's become sacrilegious for any of us to miss it, for lack of a better term. And part of that, in addition to furthering our learning, is we're really engaging our staffs. We're starting to bring our staffs together. We did, for instance, on our implementation day, we have plans to bring them together again in the spring for a joint staff meeting to show that we're all working on the same thing so that we're aligned. So that's really just piggybacking off what Terry was saying with the collaboration. That's kind of what we've committed to in terms of setting the conditions for ourselves. Not only learning for ourselves, but modeling the ongoing growth mindset that Scott spoke to a little bit earlier as well. So far, it's been excellent. It's been a really, really valuable instrument as we engage in and further our inquiry around the instructional core. So that's what we're doing here in the Rutland Zone at Jim's school, myself, together with our high school as well.
Great, thank you. Anyone else want to jump back in around this idea of how you're creating those collaborative time opportunities for your staff?
I'll jump in, but it's not really on that topic. I just have something else. Is that all right?
Go for it, Heidi.
It's all right. Like the last person, it took me a while to figure out how to unmute myself, but I've got it now, and I'm just curious because we didn't really get to it on this call. I'm just wondering about anyone who's still online who have any examples of how they're starting to document their work. Because I know just in conversations with my group that comes up as something that's kind of weighing on people, not really having an idea how to do that or really what the expectations are around that. So maybe just if anyone could jump in on that, that would be great.
I would offer just one thought, and it's my focus has kind of morphed and shifted somewhat through the course of the first half of the year, and it's really becoming about timetable reform and initiatives and innovation there to hopefully create pockets for collaboration. I've been visiting other schools and gathering research data about the effectiveness of things like a flex block. But what I'm doing is trying to sort of document, not religiously each month, but sort of the comment we made back in July about perhaps a slide per month, so that at the end of the journey, I kind of perhaps maybe have 10 slides that will sort of document the steps to the point where I am at the time in May when we share. So, and it's PowerPoint or some sort of technical slide thing just works for me. So that's what I've been doing.
Thanks, Darren.
If I could chime in on that, not as an example, but to reiterate again what Darren just said around that idea of whether it's one slide a month or it's one slide or some way to do something on a sporadic base, that when we look to this final presentation, it's not intended to be a dissertation. It's not also intended to be data driven unless you have the kind of data that perhaps Dan may have from his literacy study from the beginning to end, or that some of the others that are using data as a basis may wish to share that. But it's also intended to share the reflection and the growth of your own growth and the growth of the conditions that you've been able to set as you move forward. So it may not be data, it may be a quote that you're thinking about at a particular time, that if you did use a PowerPoint, as Darren is suggesting, that is just up there that says, this is the kind of thinking I was having throughout over the course of the year. It could be a picture that captures perhaps the foggy days in Vancouver, that is brilliant sunshine above, but you're sitting in the midst of the fog as you work through the challenges of the conditions that we set. So from our perspective, when we set it, it was to be rather open. but somehow being able to capture the kind of thinking, the kind of reflecting, the kind of conditions that have come to you in perhaps an innovative way, as that was the intent from the beginning. So, Saber, I don't know if you want to add any more to that, or if others have other suggestions, as Darren did, around that, the 1 slide a month.
Yeah, I think that gives a structure for those who need, and it really, yeah, I have nothing else to add, Liz. I think you summed it up perfectly in terms of what we're thinking about it.
Peter has something he'd like to say.
That's all right. No, I was just going to tie Saber's comment and Heidi's comment, and even what Darren was saying is it's all about documenting the time that you are reflecting upon, and what Liz was saying, reflecting upon. I know we're going to use evidence, so we want to talk about the evidence of how we move forward. And I'm looking to use in our school plan as we get our inquiry question for our school plan. Talked about that yesterday with our lead learner group, department heads, about how do we look at the minutes, how do we look at from all our various meetings, and we have from school-based team meetings, we have staff meetings, department head meetings, grade 8 coordinator meetings, grade 9 coordinator meetings, all of the different times where, and goes back to what, all the time we spend discussing and what we discuss. And for our focus at my high school, it's all about learning. So how often do we talk about learning and focus on that learning and that evidence and saying, okay, you know what, we really talked about the impact of learning in our context in this department meeting. And so you're documenting all the time. You're in every staff meeting, whether it is a slide or whether it's the minutes of that staff meeting. All of that shows and you're gathering evidence that what your focus is on at your given schools is being discussed, and you're getting the time and space and practice to be able to discuss that with your colleagues. And I think that's the underlying theme, is to be able to really tie all of those together. One of the things that I talked about yesterday at my lead learning meeting is that we have so many things in our inner city high school, kind of like Dan's school. We're inner city Surrey, and so it's compounded. Is that we have so many things going on at our school, and I want the common thread, the alignment, to have that focus around learning. And from what we're seeing and what we're getting back from our lead learners and all of the various other committees that we have a vulnerable students committee, we have a school-based team committee, we have a late attendance committee, we have a new systems and structures committee. All of that, if our central principle is how does that affect our learning as educators, and what do we have to learn, and how does that ultimately filter through to our student learning, then we have that evidence as we move forward where we have to move and adjust. So I think it kind of all ties together what everybody's doing and what Heidi was asking. You know, ultimately we're going to have a school plan. We're going to have to show evidence that that school plan's being implemented. Where does that evidence come from? It comes from all of the various pieces that Darren and the rest of us are talking about.
Thanks, Peter. I think that's, bye, Darren. Thank you, Peter. I think that's helpful, because each of you will have that kind of evidence that will be rather extensive throughout your thinking throughout this entire year and before and after. In terms of the actual evidence for this purpose, again, we're not looking for your school plan per se. It would be more of that reflection as you gather all that evidence that you quite critically need for your school, and what were the key points. So I think it's a matter of attracting out of all of what you do and all the evidence you gain on a daily basis or monthly basis. What are some key little things that you were thinking of specifically that might help you? Dan's made a suggestion, perhaps we put something up through Better Educate. Perhaps we can be a little clearer and say we're looking for people to make a 90-second or a 2-minute or a 5-minute, whatever we determine, encapsulation and summarization of their year, not of the specifics of what you actually did per se, but of how you reflected on what you did. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. Otherwise, again, it's huge. What you're doing is fantastic, and it's amazing to hear what's going on out there. And I think we need to continue this. I love the sharing that's been going on today. But for the evidence at the end of short course 2, it would be your reflection on where you've come and what you've done.
We only have a few more minutes in the room. Is there anyone who wanted to share in who hasn't had an opportunity this morning? I see Margaret is there. Joanne, if you've had a chance to settle in and wanted to chime in.
I would like to share this great book that I'm reading right now. And I'm just finding it to be quite inspiring around a mindset of positive school leadership and bringing together a lot of different research in summary of an attitude, I think, just a way that we can be together with our staffs. And I would highly recommend it. Joseph Murray and Karen Louie.
Well, and thank you, Margaret. And that's part of what we hoped would be shared today are some of the resources that you are particularly using to help move along your own learning. And we had talked about potentially making some kind of a list of books or websites or talks that people are listening to so that there is that archive of resources, learning resources for us. So that's a great one. That book is a terrific read.
Perhaps what we'll do is put something out and ask people to submit those, and then we can put it up on Better Educate. We have a timeline by next week. Give us anything you're reading, listening to, thinking about. We'll publish it then out on Better Ed.
That's great. So with our last 2 minutes remaining, is there anything else that we wanted to bring into the conversation before we wrap up and close out today? So I think just going back to that idea of documenting, what was coming up for me was the idea of what we don't want this to be is making that poster that we have to make to show what we did. I think we really want to stress that the documenting is part of the learning process and that it's a piece of the learning. And if we're asking teachers to be assessing as within their practices, then as, we want to be modeling that with what we're also doing. And so how can we find a way to have it be less that poster show and tell and more reflecting on what was I intending to do, what actually happened, how have I changed and shifted and moved, and what are the ways that I could maybe share some offerings. As we heard this morning, offerings on where the inquiries lead us in our learning and open new spaces for thinking. So I think we'll definitely be reaching out with less of a model and more of guidelines that people might want to just take a look at and say, if we were to come together and share this large process of learning, what are some of the ways that it might look like? But I would hesitate to say that we all have to do the poster on ancient Egypt.
Yeah.
At the end of this project. Thank you, Anne-Marie and Peter, for helping us with the technology pieces. That was a great plan B. It ended up being a good conversation to hear where people are at and get a